May the merits of these teachings benefit all beings. May these words help and not harm. May they clarify and not confuse. May they self-liberate, leaving no trace behind. All right. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. We are at the halfway point of these 8 realizations of great beings. And the 4th realization is the awareness that indolence is an obstacle to practice. And the commentary says, you must practice diligently to transform unwholesome mental states that bind you. And you must conquer the 4 kinds of Mara in order to free yourself from the prisons of the 5 aggregates and the 3 worlds. And I am calling this realization, Find Your Enthusiasm. Because, I think we all know that practice takes work, that it takes effort, that any kind of real transformation takes effort. And just before I was reading this article in the New York Times, I found this article that a man by the name of Larry Shainberg wrote in 1976, when Daibosatsu Monastery had just been built. And he was a student of Eido Roshi for many years. And he afterwards sat with us at the monastery, so I know him. And he was saying that 1 out of 25 people who go to a Zen monastery, a Zen center, 1 out of 25 will actually stick with it and perhaps become a student. But that if you do it for 3 years, then you'll do it for the rest of your life. I thought that was interesting. And he also said that in his experience, Zazen at a certain point had become very organic. He said, like eating. And he says, while this makes life without it rather difficult to imagine, it also makes the practice harder. Like others, I think I used to help myself along by making it heroic. And I thought that was very apropos of this 4th realization. I used to help myself along by making it heroic. I have definitely done that myself. And so what does it mean to let it be organic? Let it be completely ordinary. And at the same time, be filled with our enthusiasm, with our zeal, with our aspiration for practice. And the 4 kinds of Mara, 4 kinds of demons, 4 kinds of obstacles are unwholesome thoughts, the 5 skandhas, essentially the self, death, and distractions. So, very simply, this realization is saying to free yourself of the self takes hard work, right? Doing it half-heartedly won't cut it. Doing it superficially won't really change anything. And so to free yourself of the self, of desire, of death, of the fear of death is no small thing. Knowing this, the real question is, how do we muster up that enthusiasm, especially during those times when we don't feel it? That's the question that I want to work with today. And for the benefit of those of you who are joining us for the first time, today we're doing what I call a threaded talk, which means we are writing the Dharma talk together. And I was thinking about how Daido Roshi would often introduce, he would do this especially when doing Dharma encounter, right? This formal but unscripted one-on-one meeting between teacher and student that would happen in public. And he would always introduce these by saying there are 5 ways that teachers and students interact. And then he would go through and he would list them, and he would say there's a Dharma talk, and there's question and answers, and there's this, there's informal, etc. And I was thinking about that as I was, looking at the calendar and kind of planning what to do when, and thinking that that's kind of what I've been doing. What we've been doing together is finding these different ways to interact in a way that feels skillful, that feels engaging, especially in this medium of Zoom. And so this is different from just an informal discussion. And if we do it well, you will feel the difference, right? Because in group discussions, 2 things can happen. Either the group is cohesive and really working together, or it's not. And then each person is kind of in their own world, in their own bubble, talking about their own concerns. It not necessarily taking in, listening to, tying together their reflections to anyone else's. A threaded talk is the first, right? When we are working really as one body, where we're very actively practicing listening and speaking from that place of connection. Picking up the thread of each other's words, and even if we go off in a different direction, that the connection is still there. And so this means that we have to be really present with one another. And that's why the couple of times that we've done this, I have really valued it so much, because I think it's such a concrete expression of our interbeing. And not to mention that the practice of deep listening is always helpful, right? To listen fully and trust that we don't have to be planning what we're going to say while somebody else is speaking, that when we listen deeply, that when we listen into what is being said and into the silence and into ourselves, that from that silence and from that openness and that connection, we speak from a place of wisdom. So that's what I'm hoping for today. And so I gave the question, how do we muster up enthusiasm when it's flagging? But to start us off, I want to offer another question that one of you included in the blue sky reflections, right, on the format of these Wednesday meetings. And one of you said, my guiding question is, how can I show up to be with the Sangha for 2 hours each week and not subtly reinforce the speed, production, transactional consumption, collapse cycle of modern life? How can the way that we come together feel supportive and nourishing for all involved? And I think this too is an excellent tie-in to that first question I posed. And so if whoever wrote that on the blue sky notes, if you are here and if you are willing to take up your own question and start us off on this threaded talk, that would be wonderful. So the first question, I guess, is, are you here? Did one of you? I am here. Excellent. All right, so you can take it away, Jess.
Oh, great. Yeah, I think whenever I was thinking about that question, the thing that was coming to mind was the way that coming to a Dharma thing or producing a talk for a Dharma gathering just becomes this cycle of production, right? It can be both a practice, or it can also kind of be the way that meditation becomes not practice, becomes a way of hiding. And I think I'm curious for the group, how can we hold each other so that it's not that? That's not really what I'm interested in. And also, how does it not become just a social gathering or just a, nice place? How does rigor continue within that bounds? And I guess my answer for the laziness question maybe might go the opposite direction. And that I know that the traditional, antidote to laziness is exertion, right? You try harder, you keep pushing, you find some way to engage. But I was really struggling with my practice after my own sangha really fell apart in the last few years. And I was talking to a friend and a mentor, and I was just saying, I don't know why we meditate. What are we doing here? What? No, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm just going to watch Netflix. And that's not any different. How is that different? I'm staring, my gaze is fixed. I'm not doing anything different. And my dear friend was like, okay, well, just he had the utter confidence that laziness will burn itself out, right? Laziness consumes laziness. And ultimately it did. I'm here practicing there's something that's here. So I think to tie those two things together is how do we let what's arising in our own feelings, even if they're not positive, how do we let our practice and the way that how do we bring those to this gathering so that it can kind of consume itself or burn itself into whatever it becomes or transmute itself. So that's all.
Blue.
So I'll do the best I can to answer Jessica, I think, but I might fail. And so I think what you're saying is that there's something, I think you're trying to contradict our notions of productivity and busyness and distraction, and how do we get away from that? And I was thinking about failure, and I was thinking instead of being very heroic, instead of being lazy necessarily, but to embrace the failure of not practicing well. And I think in our society, especially our educational system, doesn't really value failure. We always want students to be productive. We want them to get good grades. If you don't get good grades, you get a penalty, you get a bad grade. But actually, a lot of good work and good good inspiration actually comes out of failing, because you are actually examining yourself. You're being curious about, why am I being lazy, or why am I not doing this? And maybe you try something new, or maybe you persevere, but at least you're looking at the failure. And I think failure is the place where we're kind of most vulnerable too. And so I think that's the place that I have to constantly remind myself to be in, so that I can interact with others at the most, most intimate level. But it takes a lot of courage to do that. So that's my answer.
Jess.
Yeah, I think I have a similar answer, which maybe stated a slightly different way, is to make very large the idea of what practice is. I do struggle with how to make it large enough to include everything without making it so large as to be meaningless. Um, making it large enough while allowing space for honesty with myself. Like, are you practicing? Like what counts as practice, I think is something that I am struggling with. But yeah, I think, it's been very important to me in the last few weeks to be able to continue showing up here, even though I don't really feel like I have anything to offer and like don't really, and feel like my practice feels like very like eking out every little iota of energy. So to be able to be really honest about like what practice looks like, and not to have the definition of it be so small that like you're at, only if you're doing these things are you practicing, and otherwise like maybe don't show up.
I'd like to just pull out a thread there and hold it up, because I think it's important. And that was your question, what counts as practice? And I think it's an interesting way to frame it, and it's a common way to frame it. What counts as practice? Marguerite.
Well, I am going to respond to Blue. I'm glad she mentioned failure. When she said failure, I thought, failure? I don't think I'm failing at anything. But then you went on to say failing at the practice, and I thought I am. And I sit with the Buffalo Zen Dharma community. I'm from Buffalo, and I sit with them on Mondays and Tuesdays. So I get a couple hours in each of those nights. And then I'm very, very grateful to be with you folks on Wednesdays. And then I do a Thich Nhat Hanh group on Saturdays. But when I'm with the Zen Dharma community in Buffalo, and I'm with those students that are always going to the continuous thread at the monastery, I feel like a failure because I don't always go. They're always going. I think, oh my gosh, and so that really makes me look at myself and feel like I'm a failure because they're so into doing that. And so I think, like Jess said, and what else do I do to practice? And I was thinking of my mindfulness, and I thought, is mindfulness good enough? Is it good enough just to be aware of everything that's happening, aware of washing the dishes, aware of being aware? And I worked with Tony Packer, and she says, just stop the I stuff and just say awaring. I'm awaring the sun. I'm awaring spring. And I thought, well, maybe that could be good enough. I don't know what's going to be good enough. I think the mindfulness I can do all as much as possible because it's always happening. Obviously, Zazen isn't always happening, so I really can put more effort into being mindful of everything that's happening in my life. So that awareness and that mindfulness, I think, is like a bonus. That's where I think I don't even want to be good or bad or fail or pass either. That sort of gets my ego all tangled up into this. And so I look at my ego. So I think maybe I'm practicing when I recognize my ego is just running rampant and I'm so upset with it and I want to tell it to go away. And so I guess as I talk to you all, I think I'm doing practice and I'm doing it in a variety of ways, but I'm not doing the continuous threads all the time. And so I don't know. Zuisei, be my teacher later when we can talk and tell me about these students and their intensity. And I'm not a student. So I don't know. That makes me feel like the failure. And, oh gosh, this is enough. Thank you all.
Marguerite, it's okay that you don't do the continuous practice retreats all the time. It is perfectly fine.
Thank you.
Jitsuko.
Yeah, hi. I remember going up to the monastery and just meeting people, and they're like, I never miss a day of sitting. And this is like back in the day, like, I don't remember, but just remember going up there, meeting people like, I don't miss a day. I'm like, what the heck? Like, I miss a day. I always miss sitting. Like, I don't sit. Like, and then just like definitely feeling like a failure, you know? Um, and I guess like trying to engage the practice in other ways. And that was really helpful. Like, especially where I was living out in the middle of a Navajo Indian reservation, and it was very, very sparse. And I was just kind of able to practice all the time, whether or not I was sitting or not. Um, and I think that that was useful to realize that, oh, I'm actually can always be practicing, because like you said, like mindfulness is always happening. I'm like, oh yeah, like, and like that was kind of my point of sitting in the first place, was that like I wanted to kind of like have this impact my life while I'm not on the cushion. Like that was sort of like, I like how I feel when I'm on the cushion, but I want to feel like that all the time, you know? And then now I'm realizing I think there is something to sitting formally constantly, or like on a regular basis. It's like a little bit like gas in your fuel tank. And I think I remember like reading about bodhicitta, and like that you can overcome Mara if you build up a certain amount of bodhicitta, but you have to build it up. Like you can't, like you have to have a full gas tank. And so like I'm starting to kind of connect those two. Like maybe if I sit on the cushion, like maybe my life will feel better. Like maybe if I sit on the cushion, maybe I can tell Mara to like, you're not going to bother me today, Mara. You know, like maybe those are connected, maybe. But I hate sitting on the cushion. And I can't stand those people that are like, I sit every day. I mean, good for them. Like, bravo. But I have a hard time. It's so hard for me to sit on the cushion. I want it to happen naturally, and I don't want to work for it.
Something about what you said, Jitsuko, in terms of bodhicitta. That's exactly right. You know, so there's the that arising of bodhicitta, and the first, you know, that it can happen naturally. I think for many of us, at some point, if we recognize it, and then you have to maintain it. You have to actually take actions that will nurture it, that will feed it. And zazen is just one of those actions, but that is very true. And that is true of zazen too. There is an aspect of it which is so natural, because remember, we're sitting as the beings that we already are, right? As the Buddhas that we already are, the awakened beings that we already are. But we don't know that most of the time. Most of the time we forget. Therefore, we put in effort to remember, which is the meaning and the root of the word mindfulness, to remember. Chris.
The feeling I got from what Jitsuko was just talking about, she didn't use this word, but I really felt it, like the sufficiency of ourselves in each moment. And for me, that's what's been running around, circling around in my head for the past few minutes, is trusting the sufficiency of our experience in each moment, and trusting that if we're feeling lazy, that there's something there for me, you know, in the laziness. Like it's everything's, you know, everything appears to teach us and to help us. And so I can't exclude that, you know, the laziness and the times when I've been less than fully motivated I think are fruitful, if nothing else, they provide some contrast and some space and definition and things to practice. And they actually, in some ways, I think like laziness and then needing a feeling like I need to overcome it, invites like good questions about how do I motivate? And those questions I can take for granted for a long time. Like when I was in a year of residency at the monastery, I don't recall doing any like real inquiry or reflection about what motivates me, because the container is so strong that as long as you show up and some nice person will come get you if you don't show up. So talk about like not needing to generate your own motivation. You can get by without looking at your own motivation very much. And then the times when I have to generate it myself, I'm in one of those right now, do much more of that. It's actually very much a blessing, and the sort of shame story about not being naturally motivated, you might say, can hold me back, but it's also that that's something to look at too. It can all become grist for the mill, and I think that's the beautiful side of indolence, I think is the word that you said in the beginning, which is such a great word. It just means to be free from suffering, actually, but we use it as lazy, and those are two very different things. Like, so that's something that comes up for me. But to trust the sufficiency of that in this moment is a great practice by itself. Because if I'm not okay with that, then it means I'm not okay with some significant part of myself. I'm not okay with this moment. I'll get more agitated if it keeps going forward in time, and that's not really advancing my practice or my inquiry. So, yeah.
Liz.
Hello. I like what you said, Chris. The container is so strong. I think we all have to sort of make our own container wherever we are, but that's something I'm working on. I was thinking about also just the sort of mundane nature too of sitting sometimes, and what in contrast with being I don't know if I'm ever heroic, but sort of like making your bed. You get up and you make your bed. I've been doing that pretty consistently, which I didn't always, but I think I went through a life stressor, and I just started making my bed, and it helped me feel that I had some control, I guess. So I guess we could look at our practice a little like that, not that that's accurate, but giving it shape and a time and a place can help us to bring it into our life more easily. So that's what I've been working on a little bit the last couple days. I had made sort of a list before about just things that helped me. Of some, I know Buddha, I think, even said that good friends can help us practice. And that's true in my life, for sure. Reading, listening to the Dharma, talking to teachers, just creating conditions. So that was my little list. But I also like talking about failure. We all fail on some levels all the time, and those are usually our greatest teaching moments, and can be the hardest time to sit, but probably, I don't know, probably the most worthwhile somehow, right? That's about it.
And if I may, Liz, you know, don't shortchange yourself when you were speaking about, you know, making the bed and that gives you a sense of control. You know, you went through a huge transition. The death of a parent is a seismic shift. The death of a mother, even more so. I mean, it doesn't become more intimate, more personal than that. I mean, you came out of her body, quite literally, and now she is gone. And so there's that. And you seems, you know, very naturally then turn to a very simple, very mundane, very ordinary task, right? Of just making your bed. I would encourage you, you know, that as you do that, you know, you really touch in, you know, be mindful, as people have been saying, about how that makes you feel, you know, while you do it and afterwards. Because if you think about it, you're just very naturally doing what monastics have been practicing for millennia. You know, you could say the ritualization of very ordinary tasks for the purpose of, partly, or let's say mainly, you know, at least in the case of Buddhism, to waking up within that task. But then there is also the word that's coming up is relinquishment. There's something that happens in even in very small instances and for short moments of doing something like that, you know, where you're no longer thinking about it, you're just giving yourself to the task. I really feel that there's something that happens that it just, Marguerite was talking about the self, that it just kind of erodes the strength of the self. So whether you feel like it or not, we've talked about this before, whether it's time for it or not, whether you think it's going to help or not, you just do it because there's something that happens just in the doing. So I just want to throw that out there, that I think you've turned very naturally towards something actually quite profound. Just don't turn it into a thing.
Thank you. I'll pay attention. Yes.
Adam.
Gosh, there are, I sort of want to pick up on every thread that has been put out. I think about, you know, when I began practice, and I began practice at, you know, at Fire Lotus on 23rd Street. And I so craved, you know, what Chris was talking about, that container. And because I wanted to practice so badly, but I needed the container because that's just who I am. And I really went, the way I found to create the container was I lived nearby. So I quickly became the person who had to open up. I became every single morning. I was the one who had to be there, you know, before 7 and then open up and get ready. And that was, you know, and then I ended up doing many of the evenings too. And it was not selfless. It was, I mean, it was helpful, I think, but it was what I needed. I needed that. And you know, for a while when the temple opened up in Brooklyn, I still and morning sitting moved to 6:30. I was still sometimes getting up. For 2 or 3 mornings a week and getting on the subway at 5:30, and eventually that couldn't keep. But I guess, you know, I'm also thinking about failure. There came a point where there was an upheaval, you know, at the monastery and within the sangha, and I felt I felt that I had been failed, but I also, and then I turned from practice and I felt that I had failed, that I didn't know how to meet what was going on. And I've had I had many years of in and out of practice. Sometimes working with Myotai Sensei when she's been in New York and available, other times just sort of on my own, and times where I just felt really failing. Just I'm not doing this, and feeling that my practice sometimes, I would sit, but it felt very stale, and I just and it, I would say a little bit before the pandemic, I started going and sitting with the Village Zendo just because I wanted to sit again. I wanted to, and I needed some container. And then the pandemic happened and I really, really, really needed I needed it. I needed it really badly. And in a way that, that felt as necessary and vital as when I'd first started practice. And I to pick up on the idea of what is practice, what counts as practice, was all of that time wasted, or was there a practice going on? And because the question, the urge that brought me to practice in the first place was still there. It was still alive. I was, sometimes I gave attention to it, but it was, so I don't know, was that practice? And what revitalized my practice for me was letting go of what my current practice is. And I just went back to counting every inhalation and every exhalation and just saying, I'm starting at the beginning. And it was the first time I did it. It was a revelation. It all came alive for me again, because I had nothing to prove. I had nothing to, it just, I didn't need to get anything. I just wanted to be there. And so I don't know I don't know exactly where I'm going with this, other than I think I'm trying now to find a way to create my own container and to keep this thread of practice going. And I guess if I've seen one thing that has allowed me to do it, it's when I come up against something that seems familiar or stale, is maybe just letting go of what I think I know about it and seeing, can I let go of that habit of mind and approach it without everything I know about it, which is what, I guess that's what worked for me with Zazen, was I don't need to know anything anymore. I don't need to have attained anything anymore. And it came alive for me. So I think I will leave it at that. Thank you.
I'm going to pull out another thread. How is something wasted? Amy.
Well, I thought about this a lot because, as some of you might know, I went to the monastery for quite some time, and also the temple in New York City. And at a certain point, I stopped coming, and I struggled a lot with practice. It was very performative at times for me, trying to do it right or not fail, things like that. And and Zuisei, I'm sorry, you had said the thread you pulled out, I forget exactly what you said, but could you repeat it one more time, because it was related to what I was just about to say.
How is something wasted?
So yes, so that's what I was wanting to get at, because that sense of being performative or not wanting to fail, and a lot of it for me was around, I literally, when I would sit physically, it was so painful for me. It was physically so painful for me that sometimes I would just be either nauseated or trembling. It was that painful. And, I just couldn't, I was younger. And so I thought, I needed to sit in cross-legged positions or whatever and just try to manage that. I was on ibuprofen throughout sessions, and it was really difficult. And I think when I stopped practice for a while and then came back to some other sanghas in the area I live in, one thing I brought that to one of the teachers there, and she was like, well, just sit in a chair. Now I know that seems very obvious, right? But I was younger. And so I felt like it would be failure to do that, because I'm like, well, why would I sit in a chair? I'm not that, I'm pretty young. So I don't consider that time wasted, because what it did for me, even throughout all that pain and all that difficulty that I experienced, that in retrospect could be considered very unnecessary, what I learned was I did achieve a sense of how to quiet my mind, so that when I wasn't formally in practice, I did start bringing that into other places in my life. I resolved to bring it into my physical activities, my sports activities, my music, this, that, and the other, and to just breathe and use that quietness of mind that I had learned through that kind of discipline, if you will. And I realize practice isn't discipline per se, but because I had applied myself in that way, again, you could say it sounds maybe like it was wasted time, but I don't think so, because it made me look at it. And then in retrospect, now I just say to myself, I want to practice, and I'm going to remove the barriers to my practice. Like, I'm not going to sit here and be performative or to, focus on whether I'm going to fail or not, but just remove the barriers. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to sit in a chair. I'm going to sit however I can sit, where I'm not so much in pain that I can't even focus on breathing practically. And so to me, I don't think it's wasted time, even if, you could say the practice was maybe not what it should have been, but it was where I was at the time. And so I guess I had to go through that. I don't know. But I wouldn't say that we waste time in these places. We just sometimes have to be where we're at until we're not there anymore.
Which then makes the should irrelevant. You are where you are until you're at a different place. Exactly. And so tying that to what Chris said earlier, there is nothing that is not part of that whole. There is nothing that stands outside. There's nothing that we cannot use. John, I'll be with you in just a moment. Just James had his hand, and then you can go.
Thanks. Yeah, this is pretty incredible. Sometimes perspective is wasted. And I think the thing that hit me was that every single person here on the call came out of mother's body. Everyone on the planet came out of mother's body, everyone. So I think that perspective is kind of missing. We all came out of mother. And the sky just fell on my head like a blue pancake. Thanks.
John.
Thank you. The threads are well interwoven at this point, but the one common thread I hear is failure, and then some about wasted. And this is from someone who's a bit inconsistent with practice at best. So I don't think failure is accurate, because it sounds like that would be only based on comparisons. I could consider myself a failure for being as inconsistent as I am, and yet I don't, because I started at some point long ago. And wasted time is also relative. That is to say, maybe a session is not as expected, but therefore it's not wasted. It's a learning experience. But the original thread was how to reignite enthusiasm as it starts to falter. And that could be very different for everyone, but I think remembering the benefits of sitting when one is not sitting can encourage one to sit again, because although things can be difficult, the benefits from something difficult are always there. So I just wanted to get that in as I kept hearing the word failure, because I don't think anyone hears a failure or failed at all. And that's it for me.
Yes, thank you for bringing that up, John. I think, another way of looking at it would be, if you're going to fail, fail completely, thoroughly, every ounce of your being, fail. Then where's the problem, or what's the problem? Norm.
Yes, can you hear me? Yes.
Yeah.
Amy, thank you for what you said. You renewed my my wanting to participate in these talks. So I went into Ryushin Dokusan once, and I said, sensei, I'm lazy. And he said, okay. No, he said, we all are. What I heard was, okay, fine, now what? And maybe we just don't do enough of that. Okay, fine, now what? That's all I have. Thank you.
Nina.
Yeah, I wanted to circle back to the thread that John touched on at the end, which was the original question I believe Jessica had written. Or no, I'm sorry, Zuisei, maybe this was yours. The how to revive enthusiasm in the practice, turning the indolence into that question. And as I listened to everyone, and I too heard, these words failure and waste, and found it interesting that those are connected to what we think of as capitalist productivity, consumerist kind of lens on what we do, doing rather than being. Like, is there an outcome that's wasted because there's no outcome? It's like, and failure, it's like people, recently I've been really conscious of people talking about failed marriages. And I'm like, well, what does that mean? There was no what's the outcome? Is it the length? And it actually made me think about practice, and that, I'm sure many of you have done long retreats, and then others have been monastics. And when you disrobe as a monastic, does that mean you're a failure? There's so many examples of incredible teachers that have left, and married each other, whatever. So I just, those words failure and waste, I've been sort of trying to replace those with other words, perhaps because I have an aversion. But the other, the sort of one contribution I wanted to, I think, is that indolence for me could be also replaced with the word boredom. Or I guess what I think of in my practice, which is, not continuous either, when I am avoiding sitting, or when I'm indolent and I'm beating myself up about that, I try to get, the antidote for me is to get curious, to investigate why. And very often when I feel strong aversion to sitting, there is a reason, there's a hindrance, there's a fear. So the very act of engaging with my indolence is my noticing my indolence, oh, wait, there's like, is practice. And, nothing is wasted, because there's an outcome there, which is that we remember and we try to return. And often I'm sure this is a paradox, is that when I most don't want to sit and I overcome that indolence or that avoidance or the underlying fears, then that is the time that I am most nourished and most liberated by sitting. So it's just, it's sort of like there is no failure if you can get interested. And then I just wanted one last thing is I've had a mantra in my head that I plagiarized, and I have to figure out who I plagiarized it from, because it's either Christina Feldman or Ajahn Sushito, it was a talk on virya and energy. And the line was, where there is interest, there is attention, and where there's attention, there is energy. And so just to conclude, for me, enthusiasm could be replaced by energy. Like, how do I get interested enough to bring my full attention to a mind state, even like indolence, enough to generate a new energy or enthusiasm? So thank you.
Yes, that is a very nice place to, to stop, just because, we could keep going, but, there's something very simple, I think, to remember, which is that we don't have to be on fire to practice. I mean, if we are on fire, great, and then use it. Use that natural hunger and energy and enthusiasm. But if you're not on fire, that's okay. I've said before, you start with a little spark, tiny little spark. I was remembering how the Pikani of the Blackfoot Nation, they carry a live coal in a container made out of a horn, a buffalo horn. Understanding how sacred fire is, understanding how fire is life, how that little spark will bring something to life. So they would carry it every time they would move to another place, and they would tend it very carefully. That's basically it. That's basically it. Protecting that little coal with everything that we have. And sometimes it is going to be a tiny spark, or we have to, like, there's that koan where the one of the monks is kind of raking through the embers, and he's like, no, there's nothing here. And the teacher comes and rakes a bit more. It says, how can you say there's nothing here? In finding those little bits, of fire. That's it. That's it.